there are four different behaviors. There are many behaviors, but there are four that stand out and tend to be common among all great entrepreneurs. One of those behaviors is
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Rishad to the show. He is the author of, let me pull this all up. He is author, speaker, advisor of multiple different things and worked in multiple different companies. The main thing, though, and why I really wanted to have Rishad on the show is he's the author of Rethinking Work and Restoring the Soul of Business. He's also the host of the podcast series, What's Next? Writes the Sunday Substack, The Future Does Not Fit in the Containers of the Past. And he had his entire 37-year career at the Publicis Group, which is, of course, amazing in general because they are notoriously an amazing organization, but a tough place. They have really high expectations. And of course, to be at any company for 37 years is almost unheard of nowadays. In so many questions about the future of work, remote work, fractional work, things that Rishad has spent a huge amount of time thinking about. So Rishad, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's great to have you.
Well, thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So Rishad, maybe if you could just kick things off. Well, actually, before we even do that, as I mentioned, I love to ask everyone, we are the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. To me, being an excellent entrepreneur is being open to new ideas around business, how you run your organization, key things that you talk about a lot. But before we go deep on all of your writings and thoughts, maybe just kick us off. Like, how do you define excellent entrepreneurs? I'm sure at Publicis, you've worked with many of the top tier entrepreneurs and business leaders. What do they have? What does that look like? How do you define that in your mind?
Well, there are four different behaviors. There are many behaviors, but there are four that stand out and tend to be common among all great entrepreneurs. So one of those behaviors is they have a perpetually growing mindset. So they have a growth mindset.
Absolutely.
So to a certain extent, they don't look at setbacks as who to blame, but what to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So that's number one. The second one is they tend to have a very interesting combination of pragmatic enthusiasm. So they tend to be extremely optimistic,
Mm-hmm.
but it is grounded in some sort of business and market reality. So they don't fly off and go off into a world where they're just optimistic, but there is no supporting evidence, supporting data, any signal that they're, so they don't need continuous feedback saying you're cool, but the whole stuff is if there's no signal, you should kind of say, have I become a Pollyanna?
Move on. But you're saying like they're basically able to move, like they can see, they want to imagine a better future.
Yeah. So the pragmatic, the enthusiastic, you have to be optimistic and enthusiastic, but you have to be pragmatic at the same time. So when you have a growth mindset, you have a pragmatic enthusiasm. The third thing that you tend to do is the best ones tend to be excellent communicators. That they can tell their story, they can engage with people, they can inspire and paint something that doesn't necessarily exist right now, and get both investors, their own people, teams, the press behind them. So that's sort of a third one, which is very important. So obviously, pragmatic enthusiasm, growth mindset, and amazing communicators and inspirational storytellers are three of the ones that I think are very, very important. And the fourth one is they also have this weird ability to be two people at the same time. So I call duality, right? They embrace duality, which is they may be scared inside, but they show bravery outside.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They don't talk in two tongues. So it's very much like this famous Scott Fitzgerald, the side of great intelligence is to hold two opposing ideas at the same time and move forward.
Sure.
So they basically utilize doubt to feed faith, right?
Yeah.
And at the very same, so it's this what is so this. I'm not saying they're schizophrenic or anything of the sort, but we all have multiple people in us.
Of course.
The two, so they have this very interesting way of feeding, one feeding and the other.
Yep. Okay, so already a bunch of questions before we get into
Sure.
about the book, but I love those four options. And actually one I would love to dig in more deeply on. Well, actually, before I even dig on that, at a high level for all those four, right? I'm thinking myself as an entrepreneur. I'm a 4-time entrepreneur. I've invested in 200 plus companies. I imagine like myself as like, oh man, like all four of these apply to me.
Yeah.
Yet I think I'm a good entrepreneur, maybe even an excellent one. I don't know if I'm a great one yet. And my guess is most founders and entrepreneurs feel the same way. So there's this sort of mindset that people have. They believe that about themselves, but there's still something that separates the like really good from great. Is there anything else that you're like, this is really like the people who's really, really, is it obsession? I don't want to put words in your mouth a little bit, but like obsession, is it they have a different energy level? Like what has made the ones who like I'm sure you work with some companies at Publicis who like they have money, they're doing well, and then they just die. And other ones who go on to be globe changing world.
So the best ones, basically, and this is not necessarily a religious metaphor, but the best ones practice resurrection.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
Okay. Which is they find ways to bring alive what might be dead, including their teammates and other things. So it's like it appears that they're gone, right? And then they come back because to a certain extent, the really wild ones. And if you think about it, let's say, Jobs, right? He lost Apple once, but even when he brought Apple back, he was running out of money till he did a deal with Microsoft and, all of those kinds of stuff. So the idea basically is it's almost like given up for dead, they resurrect themselves, right? And the really great ones, I'm not saying you go kill yourself or come close to killing yourself, but the great ones at some particular stage have such an extreme idea and such relentless focus on it, they take it all the way to the edge so it looks almost they're dead. And then they find a way to pull it out.
Yeah, I love that. I have a friend's company. He's now a very successful VC. They got to a point where they had, I think, like 2 weeks of money left total. And so they're basically about to go out of business. He ended up resurrecting it from the dead, and then 8 years later sold the company for $600 million. An example, I think, of that. Going back to your four things, in one thing that I think you presumably, given the work you did at Publicis, are probably really well positioned to answer. What is a great storyteller, and what does that mean? And maybe actually before you answer that question, could you just define for everyone people who don't know what the Publicis Group is and why they're relevant? Give us a brief overview of them.
Sure. So the Publicis Group today positions itself as a marketing and business transformation company, but it has also historically been known as a advertising and media communication company. So today they are 106,000 employees around the world, and they are known for many of the brands that they have bought over the years, and they have sort of united under what they call a power of one platform. But some of the brands that people are more aware of are in the world of technology, probably brands like Digitas and Razorfish and Sapient. In the world of data, companies like Epsilon. In the world of advertising agencies, Liam and Nat, Saatchi and Saatchi, BBH. So it goes on and on. Okay, it's 106,000 people. What they did, which makes them particularly unique, is a few years ago, and I was there at that time working on strategy and growth with Maurice Levy and the board. We sort of decided that our future competitors were not going to be other companies like in the marketing communication space, but much more in the transformation space. So what we did is we wrote a strategy, did $10 billion of acquisition, reconfigured the entire company, and At the time we were there, we were the third largest. It's about 10 years ago. We were the third largest in size and the second largest in market cap among the big companies out there. As of yesterday, we were the largest in size, and our market cap was greater than the next two combined.
Largest in size, sorry, are you like publicly traded companies, or you're not talking about publicly traded? You're talking about like
No. So largest advertising and marketing communication and transformation companies. So other companies are known as WPP, IPG, Omnicom, Dentsu, right? So today, number one, number two, number three in size is we're number one in size in revenue. But our market cap, which is about $25 billion, is equal to the next two combined, which is 18 plus 7, right? And so we were second in market cap, and not only did we overtake number one, but we became bigger than number two and number three combined, or the old number one and three combined. And so to a great extent, we, in the United States, 40% of all media runs through our companies. So and so to a great extent, the total transformation of this company over the last decade is also what a lot of people find, particularly sort of unique, is how did we go from A to B? And I had something to do with it as being part of the team that helped that happen.
So maybe is there, it's not directly relevant to this podcast, but I also find it fascinating. Like, what is a short version of how you did that change? In part of why I'm really curious about it is, one, is just hard to change any organization. So I think that's sort of an interesting discussion. But also, like, 106,000 people for an entrepreneur sounds like, that's like the size of a small city. Like, it's huge. And yet, like, what's the benefit of being such a large conglomerate versus individual businesses?
Today, there are certain benefits to being large, and there are also lots of benefits or disadvantages of being large. But the benefits of being large in certain parts of the marketing services company is very simple. When a client company who's a Fortune 500 company with hundreds of thousands of employees, when they want something done, their assignments are big that you sometimes need to put 500-600 people on the project. And if you basically are a 10, 15, 20 person company, those companies can only basically do some creative work, right? The other is they want to get economies of scale when it comes down to buying media. So the reality of it is we are so big that we get better rates than other people because we combine rates.
And I assume those better rates outweigh the managerial costs of such a large organization. Because I'm sure the large, when you're 106,000 people, the amount of management keep that working.
But the other thing is, while we are 106,000 people, we're also 106,000 companies of one, right, operating, and we reaggregate them. But we also run it from a client perspective. So you don't feel the 106,000 people. You work on a client and you have a client team. So your team, could be as small as 20 people or 10 people. It could be big as maybe 200, 300 people or 400 people. But across the world, 400, 500 people across the world. So what basically happens is you feel that you're in a small little, you're not like a one-person company, but you're like a 50, 100, 200 person company, 250 person company. And so there are certain advantages. Obviously, there are a lot of disadvantages. And part of what, we did this transformation, but it took a long time because we had to convince a lot of people to come for the journey. And as I remind people, change sucks, but irrelevance is even worse. But change comes slow. And, I remind people, just because you say the technology can make it happen doesn't mean the people are going to make it happen. And by telling people if you don't make it happen immediately, you're going to lose your job, doesn't incentivize them to actually do it. It incentivizes them to fake it because they basically say, why is this good for me? How will my incentives change and where is my training? So most people try to do transformation and they believe transformation is a strategy, an M&A deck, and a reorganization deck. And I remind people, companies don't change, companies don't transform, people do.
That was actually one of the remember your book well, that was almost one of your quotes directly that I was reading, because I actually literally sent that to my team lead because I have a teammate who is struggling a little bit with some of the changes that we're trying to put in place. And I said, hey, like, why don't you ask them these questions and see if you can kind of bring them along for the journey and help them think through it? Sort of what your point in the book was essentially, tell me if I'm maybe butchering this, but was essentially, how do you help this person think through how they can be a participant in that change, and how should they think through what this means, versus just being told you need to change? Because that usually leads to people kind of pushing back and almost being anti-change. Is that essentially right?
Right. Absolutely.
What were the key things that you did to get 106,000 people changed around and moved in a different direction versus the other alternatives? Like, and obviously, I'm sure WPP and your competitors were theoretically saying they were going to do the same thing, investing in the same sorts of things too, and you guys pulled it off at Publicis, and they did not.
Right. So the reason I think we pulled it off, again, it was very difficult. It took a lot of time. It was many of us working at it. And much of the changes eventually even happened after I sort of moved to my second career. Right. So it was a very long and ongoing process. And I don't think it ever gets completely over. But there were 4 things that we did which stand out in hindsight. First is we made the big bets on that the future of our company wouldn't look like the past.
Okay.
And we did not have the right skill sets. So we went in the course of about 10 years from having no engineers to 22,000 engineers.
Wow. So
okay.
Almost a workforce is now engineers.
Yeah. So we had to do that. We changed our focus. We used to be a primarily US and French company. Now we're primarily a US and Indian company. Right. So there was a whole bunch of, the US and India is where most of our employees are, and most of our revenue is in the United States. Okay. So to a great extent. So we had to make certain changes that were there. So one is we made the big bets. Some of them required us to go away from our past as well as spend many billions of dollars buying things. So a lot of people, when they say that, I said, what have you bought? Like, how are you going to do this by yourselves? How are you going to scale up these new skill sets organically? It's really hard. So number one. Number two is we figured out how to integrate them and not keep them separate.
Okay.
So when we bought these companies, we figured out a model where we manage the best of both worlds. People in our industry and in many industry join a company for their specialty. So somebody is an engineer. They'd like to work in a company which is led by engineers and is engineering centric. Somebody who's a creative designer wants to work in a creative designer company. Someone who's a media strategist and buyer wants to work in a media strategy and buyer company. The client might basically need a program that has an engineer, a designer, and a media specialist. But there are 3 different companies of the Publicis Group, right? Because that's where they feel more comfortable. That's where they can benchmark against the best in their category. That is where they can architect and hone their skills. But the opportunities clients basically says, here's my problem that has to be solved. They don't break it up into, I need engineering for this, I need this thing for this. So we figured out a thing called a power of one, which is how do you unite these people and incentivize them to work together while remaining state of the art. And the big thing that we did is instead of incentivizing them on how their organization that they were working in, so let's say Leo Burnett or Digitas, we didn't incentivize them how well Leo Burnett or Digitas did. We incentivized them on how well the business did of their client and the country that they were operating in.
Oh, interesting. You're saying
okay.
Their client is
let's say it's a McDonald's, right? So the whole idea is, how is McDonald's doing? And not McDonald's. Obviously, the whole idea is that McDonald's business is up. Our business should be doing well. But the whole idea is, how is our McDonald's business doing? Are we winning business? Are we growing? Is the client happy? That's what I mean.
It's not McDonald's, their share price.
Not their share price. It's basically, how is our business doing with McDonald's, right? Is McDonald's giving us more work? Is McDonald's happy? That's number one. And second is, if you're working in the United States, how is the United States doing?
Publicis.
For Publicis, and particularly for our leaders. So the leaders are incentivized on not how their company does, but how their client does and how their country does, which basically means you're more willing to collaborate and share and give resources to other people because your particular team is a different team. It's a client team or it's a country team. It's not your particular brand as a team. Okay. So the brands existed more to hone culture, attract talent, retain talent, but compensation was tied to something else. That requires a lot of change because in effect, it means someone who's running a brand seems to feel less powerful because they don't control the budgets. They control culture, not control, but they basically try to influence the culture, hone and then make sure that they allocate the right people in the right combinations with other companies. And a lot of what they do is they work as a team with other leaders of companies. So that is a second big thing, which is how do you figure out the people alignment so people do something that works both for the company and the client and for themselves and not just for themselves and their brands. And that's a touch and go, lots of things. That's kit my thing. The third thing we did is we significantly invested in the ability to work together. We have a platform called a growth platform called Marcel. So we invested in learning and development. So our whole basic belief is, and to the point that you made, if we can only grow our clients if our people grow, so we want to have world-class people, but in the world that we currently live in, you can't remain world-class without continuous education.
And so going back really quick, I want to ask about the second one, right? About like the compensation change. How do you do, or what did you do in a sense to make sure that compensation change, like how long did it take? Was it a year, 2 years to get people really on board with things? Did you have to fire?
The entire process, basically, because we were doing it worldwide and doing it in different places first and then second, the whole process took over 2 or 3 years. It wasn't 2 or 3 months, okay? Because what we also had to basically do is say the compensation changes from year to year. In some particular cases, we had hired certain people who had contracts and we couldn't change the compensation procedure based on their contract. Somebody came in and there was an earnout, and the earnout was in this particular type of firm, right? So we had to do adjustments. So it was a form of transition that I think took a long time. So this whole idea of you invest in new things, you change your incentive and compensation system, you invest deeply in learning, which is a third, part of it. And then the fourth part, which is very important, is try to understand what's next and how to get there. That recognize that wherever you are is not where you're going to end up. So for instance, we now have made and I'm not there, but we've made significant investments in AI. Okay. At about $120 to $150 million a year. Now that's small compared to what, Microsoft and others do. But for the service businesses, doing $150 million a year in just AI investment is a lot. Okay, year after year after year. And so what is happening is that makes people interested. They say, okay, I know how to behave because I'm incentivized to do this. I can keep my skills because they're investing in different ways for me to grow my skills. So that's good. Okay. I'm working for a future-proofed organization. They're investing in certain things that are really important. And I have world-class resources because they bought a lot of these resources. And when they don't have any, they go buy it. So we bought the biggest influencer organization, called Influential. We bought the biggest retail, market-oriented organization, people who basically sell in stores. And so the whole idea is you need a capability. We have world-class capability in depth. So when you're trying to be a person, you say, I can get the best resources for my client. I'm incentivized to make my client win and being given money to train myself. And my company is not going to be irrelevant tomorrow, so I can actually be a little bit loyal here, which is interesting. You put that together and you have magic. The problem is it takes 5, 7, 8 years to create that magic. It's not like poof. It's not like, waving a wand. And that is the key thing that many of our competitors now are beginning to realize how hard it is because now our model works. So everybody says we're going to copy that model, right? And we have written what the model is because from the early days, I had to speak to the street to explain what we were doing because they thought we were like crazy. Because initially it hurt our stock price and hurt a lot of things we were doing. But we had to say, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it. So we showed stage by stage what we were doing. There was no secret formula, right? The problem simply is the secret formula that you can't hurry it up is, yes, it may have taken us 5 to 7 years. And because people both won't as probably stupid as us, would learn from our mistakes and have a plot, they could probably do it in 2 to 4 years. But the whole idea is, guess what? In those 2 to 4 years, while everyone's waiting to catch up, we've gone somewhere else.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
Which is a key thing.
That's business. And so how did you get, so the common question is from this, like, how did you get sort of executive buy-in? I mean, you're part of the exec team, of course, but like to go do this change, right? I mean, it's how do you convince the executive team in your board in the street that this is something you were going to go do?
It's relatively simple. We're in the service business. And the way we looked at it is we basically said our clients, customers were going to change the way they interacted with our clients, bought products and services from our clients. So we said customers were going to be more empowered with godlike power because of technology. They were going to basically utilize and leverage decision-making differently, which basically meant our clients would have new challenges, which they would have to solve. If we did not create the capabilities to solve those upcoming challenges, our clients would replace us with somebody who did.
Yep.
Okay. So it's kind of, once you can build the case that your clients' consumers are changing and your clients' needs are changing, and if we don't change to meet those needs, we won't have business. It clarifies people's minds.
Yeah.
So my whole basic belief is it's very easy to convince anybody once you can build the case. We have to change, because if we don't change, we won't have any clients. Or we'll start losing clients, or we won't have any clients. We'll start losing clients, and we won't win the clients. And so in effect, that was the way we basically did it. And it was just, convincing people to a certain extent by showing them how they themselves were changing the way they were shopping and things like that, and giving them case studies of companies that did not reinvent themselves. Like today, this wasn't a case study then, but today, a case study of, obviously the market caps are swinging all around these days, but the reminder that Tesla and Uber are more valuable than the next 10 automobile companies.
Yeah.
Right? And they asked 3 stupid questions, which people would think was stupid if you were running an automobile company. If you're an automobile company, you're basically an internal combustion hardware engineer with a sales background.
Yeah.
Okay. And somebody basically says, hey, it's not internal combustion engine, it's electric.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, it's not as much hardware as it's hardware and software.
Yeah.
Hey, the future might not just be about owning cars, it might be accessing mobility.
Yeah.
So what you've now done is you've basically questioned me. And if I were basically saying to you, or if you were saying to me, Rishad, you suck because you are an internal combustion hardware engineer who sells shit, change. I would say, bullshit, I don't want to change. But if someone convinced me, which apparently those companies, nobody convinced them, that it doesn't matter whether we change or we don't change, our clients' needs, the car driver, the car buyer's needs are going to change. And if we don't have products that they want in the future, we won't have business in the future.
Yep.
Right? And that's exactly what basically happened. So my whole stuff is, the way I tell people is, oh, if you don't change, it's perfectly fine. You'll be out of business. That's the choice. And when people say change is good, I remind people change sucks, change sucks, change sucks. Okay? It's really difficult. But the choice is not whether it's good or not. It's you either do change that sucks or you become irrelevant.
Yeah.
That clarifies people's minds. So my stuff is, I'm not here to argue about whether this is right or wrong. I'm here to basically decide whether we have a firm or we don't have a firm. Okay? And if you decide you don't want to change, then you should leave the firm. Because you can't destroy the firm because you want to be irrelevant. Your irrelevance is not, the firm is 100,000 people. Your particular aim to be irrelevant is not my problem, it's yours.
Correct. Yep. I love it. So how do you though convince sort of, I agree, like, but your example in some ways is telling of the sort of 4 big auto companies or whatever, Detroit auto companies. They, I'm sure, would say, we knew this change was coming. We knew we needed to make this change. We didn't do it. They had very smart teams, a lot of smart people. What did they miss that somehow you and the executive team at Publicis was able to get over that hump and say, we're going to implement this sort of massive cultural change? Like when and why did you decide that was the right way to go? Because I'm sure you also looked at, you probably had a big board meeting. You look at all the dozen directions you could go in, and we could 25% of our people or do this, do that, and you chose that.
The reason we decided to go there is we basically decided to sort of align with the future. So our whole stuff is we want to basically be winners in the future, so we better have future skills, right? And we said we want to do it in such a way that we get to the future. So the trick was balancing to make sure we deliver today and deliver tomorrow. So the whole idea is we couldn't go broke today because to get to tomorrow. But on the other hand, we couldn't focus only on today because we wouldn't get to tomorrow. So the reason, and again, all the major auto companies are today led by amazing people and have always been led by amazing people. So I'm only guessing some of the reasons why they didn't manage to make the change from my belief. To make the change, you have to do these four things, right? So the first thing you have to do is you have to start investing in new technologies, including companies that you have no clue what the hell those technologies. So that's number one. Number two, you have to basically change incentive plans. And incentive plans is the third rail of companies. You can touch anything, but if you change incentive plans, it becomes very important.
People really freak out when you touch incentive plans too. That's a real challenge.
Third is you yourself have to recognize that you have to go back to school, and some of your management has to get retrained. That your old ways of thinking are not necessarily true, right? And then the other one is you got to perpetually, while you're changing this, you have to think about what's coming next. So you got to basically say, I have my plan for today. I have my plan to get me 3 years from now. And then I have to have some sort of idea where things might be 5 years from now. It's very hard. In the old days, there used to be 10-year planning. It's very hard to see that far. But you can tend to see 1, 3, and 5 years ahead. So obviously, your planning should be more on 1 and 3 years ahead than 5 years, because it gets a little weird that. But there may be certain things, which is that if AI continues to progress at the rate it currently progresses, there'll be a completely breakthrough type of AI in less than 5 years, right? Might be in 3, but less than 5. So we say, okay, that's fine. We know that AI will be very prevalent definitely within 3 years, pretty much, right? And then, what some of the implications. I was talking to one of, while I don't work for clients anymore, I do advise people, and I speak at various places. And when I'm speaking, unlike a lot of speakers, I actually customize every talk to every audience. So I don't have a speech that I know there.
I'm sure.
Right. And yeah. So I don't mail it in. So therefore I need to talk to them and say, what are your challenges? How do you best think I should approach this? Here's stuff I can do. So I have some interactive conversation with people. And, today I was talking to a large sort of packaged goods manufacturer. And they said, what are some of the things we should think about this AI thing? So I said, okay, here are some broad things. AI is like electricity. It's going to be used by everybody. So don't go running around telling you've got an AI strategy, because everyone's going to have AI. And if you think AI is how you're going to win, well, you're not. It's like saying I'm using electricity to win.
Right.
That makes sense, but your competitors are not using candlelight. Okay. So this has been ridiculous shit. Okay. But on the other hand, it's still AI is underhyped because it's going to make knowledge free. It's going to do all kinds of stuff. So but I said, now let's figure it specific to marketing. Marketing, we market to consumers or people. Well, what happens when people basically use agents, which I call chief of staff or shopping concierges? Who are you selling to? Sometimes you're selling to the person. Sometimes you're selling to this algorithm agent. Well, parts of it, you're used to it because in the old days, you used to do SEO, SEM, and so that is a little different. Right? So that's one. A brand. How do you create a brand? Well, in addition to utility, you create it through storytelling. How do you tell stories in this particular way? How does that change? And another way you create brands is your trust marks. Well, trust is going to be a critical currency when everybody's making up bullshit all over the place. How do you do that? Content. How do you develop and distribute content? Right? Using all these new generative AI tools. So I went through, I said A, B, C, D, E, F. How do you measure? And so it was very simple, and the whole stuff is so simple. You've just showed us how 6 key tenets of ours are going to change. Right? But the way you've done it is you understand exactly what our business is and how we do business. So I haven't come in and said AI, oh my God, if you don't do AI, right? My own stuff is just like saying love. You have to be in love. Well, okay, now how do I start dating? Where do I go find love?
Yep.
Right? What's good? So to a great extent, I think that is what I do being forward. And a lot of companies, the biggest thing is many of them truly, the biggest mistake I've ever seen companies make. And I go to leaders. And by the way, this is what I also would tell entrepreneurs. So this almost everything I say is good, whether you're a 2-person company or a 200,000 person company. So I believe that world-class people, of which many of you are in your audience, you all are world-class and you all cannot be defeated. However, I've seen world-class leaders and world-class companies get defeated.
Of course.
And the way they get defeated is because they decide to defeat themselves.
What does that mean?
Self-defeat means refusing to acknowledge that you might be the problem, or that your background may not be set to go to the future, or you're not listening to signals from outside that say something is wrong with your business model.
Yeah.
Okay. So self-defeat is when you basically become like Tommy, the deaf, dumb, and blind kid. Okay.
Your ego is almost getting in the way. It's blocking you from all.
Yes. And one of the biggest things is, and entrepreneurs will claim they don't have this issue, and they have less than large companies, is you don't take the underdog seriously.
Yep.
Okay. So I've always basically said the biggest threats and opportunities to a category come from outside it.
Yep.
Okay. Gillette never saw Dollar Shave Club. IBM never saw Microsoft.
Yep.
Microsoft never saw Google. Okay. So to a great extent, it's self-defeat. And so a lot of these companies, their inability solve for themselves. So it's the reason why I think leadership is so important. You know, what Shantanu Narayan did by basically saying, I'm going to go from packaged software to in the cloud software. I'm not just going to be about creative tools. I'm going to be about marketing and other tools, right? Or Satya Nadella saying, we're no longer going to be fixating on Windows. There's no more Windows operating division. We're no longer going to fixate that we know all the answers. We're going to partner, right? So what do these people do? They basically look inside and they change the culture.
Yeah.
And what tends to basically happen is change doesn't just come, and I said it's the 6-pack of change. The 6-pack of change is have a strategy, which is what I call future competitive advantage, is what I call a strategy, right? Decide what skills sets or capabilities you need to buy and hire, and then reorganize. But then after that, how do you explain why it's good for the people? How do you incentivize and how do you train them? Many companies don't do 4, 5, and 6, including for the senior leadership. And then they get terrified because they get not terrified, they get surprised. I bought the company, I put out a press release, I did a reorganization, it never worked. And I said, yeah, because what you did was only one part of what you have to do. Those are important, strategy, M&A, and reorganization. But you forgot about the people part of it. Mm-hmm. And the reason why a lot of people forget about the people part of it is the first 3, which I've done often, is not easy, but it's easier than the 4, 5, and 6. Because the first 3 are about spreadsheets, PDFs, PowerPoints.
Right.
4, 5, and 6 are about messy things called emotion. And
what are 4, 5, and 6 again? Explain those again.
As the 4 is you have to explain to your people why these changes are good for them. Okay. Not just why it's good for the company. Why is it good for me?
Yep.
Okay. Number 5 is how will it impact my incentives, or how will my incentive change if I start doing the new things?
Yep.
And number 6 is what training and resources will be provided for me to go from where I am to what skills I need.
Yeah. So I, on the note actually of training, one of the questions I still wanted to ask was about like how much time, like money, time, effort, I don't know how the right metric is, do you spend at a company around training? And what does that look like? Like, I want to get retrained for AI. Is it, hey, we have a learning and development portal for you to go do this. We have a budget for you to go get yourself some training. We give you we set aside 10% of your time. What does that look like in an organization to help people get that training? What does that mean?
It varies in many ways, and there isn't a one size fits all. But what we basically have is we found that there are 4 forms of training. And again, depending on your level and what you're trading on, you customize and mix and match these 4. So one is what I basically call resources where you trade on demand. So think about it as we have lots of resources on a platform we call Marcel, where you can plug and play and learn different things. So think about it as like your own personal YouTube,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
right? Or your own Coursera or whatever. So you need a skill set. There are ways you can do that. That's number one. Number two is, would you like to go to class? And those are both internal programs. We have a lot of internal training. So for instance, I oversee executive training on managing change for our people worldwide. Okay. So there are classes that you either are invited to, you can go to, which are live. It's just not like self-learning, it's live. The third is we connect you to mentors on any particular space, right? Which is, would you like to learn about these people, are black belts in it and are available to connect with you when you get stuck or other kinds of things. And the fourth is we allocate people budgets to either get things or travel. So you want to learn about the world? Well, you're allowed to work 1 month every 3 years anywhere you want in the world, right? It's called Work the World. So it's a combination of these, which is an educational budget, mentors, classes, and self-training.
How do you make sure people embrace that? And what I mean by that in a sense is like we tell my team, I tell my team all the time, like we need to keep learning all the time. We need to try new things. There's lots of resources there for you. Now, yes, we're a startup, so it's we're more frugal, but there's lots of training on YouTube. There are discussions we have as a team of how we're using AI or different things like that. And I find it shocking by how difficult it is for most people to put aside time to go learn more, learn something new, do their job in a slightly different way or improved way. Like, how do you incentivize, or do you just hire for people who have the mindset of continuous learning?
What you do is I think you incentivize by a couple of ways. The first thing you basically explain to them is the choice that they have is they are learning. And as I tell people, you are learning so that you can be more employable in the outside world.
Yeah.
Right? And if these are skill sets that are needed, forget about the fact that you're doing it for us inside this company. You're doing it for yourself so you can get better jobs or outside jobs or whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. Number two, we're providing you with tools to help you learn. So we're not expecting this is some sort of immaculate conception. You suddenly have a baby or you suddenly know what the thing is. You have to figure it out, right? So we'll give you those particular things. But the other one is this. If you refuse at that stage to do so, we say, okay, when people say, I don't have time to learn, I said, you aren't telling me you don't have time to learn. What you're really telling me is you're okay becoming irrelevant.
I love it. Yeah,
that's all you're saying. So you're advertising, you're saying irrelevance is me. So I said, when I have no time to learn, so you're saying I am irrelevant. Thank you. And that changes people's minds. I said, look, this is the choice. I said, what made you think that the whole world rotates around you and there isn't a competitive landscape globally? So, the idea is I always, I'm not going into politics, whereas I'm today in Panama City, but I travel around the world, right? And what I basically tell people is, hey, listen, for every one person in America, there are 19 people outside.
Yep.
Okay. For every $1 in American economy, there's $3.5 outside, and soon will be $4 outside. Mm-hmm. Okay. The world will reroute around us. Okay, the whole stuff is we are living in a connected, fast-moving world. An AI world is a connected world, right? An internet world is a connected world. A supply chain world is a connected world. You want to get off? Fine. Too bad for you. Okay, initially you'll create havoc all over the world, but we will reroute around you. There was no America 200 years ago, and there may be no America 50 years from now. It's okay. All right? That's the way to think about it, not this bullshit. That we are in charge and shit like that. Forget about it. Anybody who speaks like that, I tell you what it is. This insecurity and knowing they're losing.
Yeah.
The most confident people are humble and they get the stuff done, right? Yeah. This is basically BS, right? And my own stuff is and then the fact that you've all these goddamn leaders bending the knee. I said, everyone in the next generation is seeing you people. They're seeing what you are. And at the end of it, you're a power and money tropic, and that means you are useless.
Yes, I love this. So this is amazing. So let's keep going. Deeper. Let's go deeper on like the actual remote, like how organizations are changing given the global nature of the world, right? Your book talks a ton about remote work, fractional work, just in the change, what happened post COVID. But so I want to dig into all of those, maybe define a lot of those terms. And one of the key things I really want to focus on is for me at least, a pet peeve. Is how shocked I am by how many organizations seem to have understood the idea that, okay, we're remote now. Remote is better. There's all these benefits to remote. And that now that everyone's going back to the office, it's like suddenly, we all need to be in person. What changed? Is your thesis in your book, which your book was only published, about a month ago, right? Like your thesis in your book, is it suddenly outdated even though it's just recently published? Or is this like a backlash post-COVID? Like everyone went remote. They now feel like they need to go back in the office. It's some weird, like, immunity response, and you're going back to office, and then you're going to figure this out in 4 years that you were just wrong.
Yeah. So what basically happens is my book actually has become even more relevant. So just today, I won't name the organization, but a very large organization, the head of data and AI, basically said, I just bought 500 copies of your book for everybody in my team.
Great.
Okay. And I'm hearing this again and again. And because what my book is, it's not a screed. It doesn't basically say there is an answer, right? And my basic belief in my book is whether you work 5 days in the office or 5 days at home, that is very little to do with the future of work. But what I would tell you is this. Let me give you a very simple thing. So I was asked some time ago, I spoke at a session at Amazon on a different topic. But then they asked the question about what do I think about their 5 days return to the office policy. So I looked at the person who invited me and I said, do you want me to answer this question? Because you'd asked me to come and talk about the future of marketing and advertising. And this is a question about the future of work, which is not what I was asked to come and speak about. And I recognize that this is a very sensitive issue. So I don't exactly know, should I say something? So she said, please, Rishad, say what you want to say. Right?
I'm sure
so this is the way I framed it. One of the reasons people can work anywhere in the world is because of something called Amazon Web Services. Mm-hmm. Number 2, one of the things that Amazon is very well known for is data-driven decision-making. There is nothing that I have seen that supports 5 days in the office unless you're a dentist or a massage therapist. And there is nothing that your CEO put in his document that supports it from a data perspective, right? There was a lot of feeling, and I feel like no data. Third is your company is particularly well known, especially for its Amazon store, etc., for personalized services. The site personalizes around me and my shopping behaviors. So I said, you're a company that created Amazon Web Services that allow for distributed work. You're a company that basically built the case for personalization. And you are the company that believes in data. And you've now basically created a model of one size fits all, anti-Amazon Web Services and not data-driven. You're not going back to day 1, you're going back to day -1. People started cheering and standing and clapping.
Had it over her house, even though she said you could.
She because she knew what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Right? And my whole stuff is, all I'm basically saying is if a company goes around saying I do personalization at scale, I'm agile and flexible, I said, how is it agile and flexible where you make every single person work 5 days in the office, irregardless of who they are, where they are, what their personal situation are, where their age is? That's complete and absolute bullshit. It is basically a failure of imagination and a travesty of management. But more importantly, one of the reasons people don't want to come back to the office, they may be fine with the office, is they don't want to come back to you. Okay, we've entered an age of debossification, and a leader has a zone of influence. A boss has a zone of control. The animals have left the zoo. I don't care what stupid meat you put. They're not coming back into the cage willingly. And when they are, they're going to grow their way out of the cage. And while they're in there, they're going to resent you every single goddamn moment. So get over it. If you can't lead, get the out of here. It's got nothing to do with the office, right? Now, I'm a huge believer, and that's what my book is about, in-person interaction. So if you were to ask me, I said, if you want a steady state model, again, if you're a massage therapist or a dentist office, it's got to be 5 days in the office. A lot of construction jobs, retailers, 5 days in the office. White collar workers, right? Well, I would say the following. you should basically have a basic fundamental that says, hey, I believe some in-person interaction is important for various reasons. I expect my base thing is maybe 25 to 40% of your time should be in a physical location. You can say that's my base, okay? 25 to 40% of your time. But it doesn't have to be like 2 days a week. It could be 1 week a month. Okay, this week a month, we all get together. Okay, that's one. All right, so that's my base program. Now I'm going to do modifications of my base, personalization of my base. So this is the base. Now I might basically go from being 25, 30% in person to 0% in person based on you're a world-class software engineer I need and you're based in Denmark. Guess what? You're going to work out of Denmark.
Yep.
Okay. We'd like you to come into work, but at the current time for the next 3 to 4 months, you've just given birth to a child or you're dealing with an aging parent. We got to figure that one out. Okay. Once that gets over or you solve for that, you come back. But in the meanwhile, we are making an exemption for you based on your personal situation. We're making an exemption for you based on the market dynamics for whom we are hiring. Now, in other cases, you basically say, I expect you to be in the office 5 days a week for the first 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because you've just joined the company. You're young. We want to give you some sort of training. We need a boot camp, 3-4 months on boot camp before you go forward. That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. And the whole idea, the lack of doing it basically says, my God, you're terrified of the future.
Yeah. So I agree with pretty much all of that, except on one part. Like, to me, it feels like you're not taking it all the way to the final chapter, and you kind of do in your book a bit, but like, even the in-person part, right? You just mentioned all these exceptions. Okay, but
the other thing also is whether the in-person part should actually take place in the office in the first place.
Right.
Okay. So my whole stuff is, say, listen, I worked in the big advertising agencies, and what they would basically say is you have to be in the office for the following reasons: for creative brainstorming, training, developing relationships. Okay, and the other one that I hear is, as you walk to the water cooler, you may bang into a friend or something like that. Okay, that's the fourth one. Okay, so let me give you this very simple facts. These are facts. These are not like me getting all weird out. Okay, it's facts. I've been in the business for 37 years. I've worked around the world. I worked across different clients. These are just pure facts. Most of the time when we want to do creative brainstorming, we left the building and we went to offsites.
Yep.
We built relationships in bars and restaurants. Okay. When we wanted to learn, we'd go to conferences and events.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, people brought their own water in water bottles. Nobody goes to a water cooler.
Yeah, 100%.
So what are you talking about?
Yeah.
The reason you want people back in the office is what you never did in the office. You want people to come back to have a mass in-person interaction? Fine, you can use the office as a place for in-person interaction, but program for it. But if people come into the goddamn office doing the exact same thing that they were doing at home, explain to me why they were commuting for 1 hour on each side, buying expensive thing, not having their own space. And by the way, most of these places, including Amazon, don't have space to actually house the people if they all come back. So my whole stuff is this. Most of this is, you know what? A way to get rid of talent without severance. This is basically such a lie, such a lie. My whole stuff is, now you understand why people are saying and rejecting, especially the next generation, their leaders. Get over it. Get out of our face. Have a real leadership. That's my whole basic belief.
Yeah, no, I also agree. I mean, like, it's insane to me that people, I talked to a lot of my friends, like, I went into the office and I sat in a conference room on Zoom calls all day. Like, well, what if he's honest?
Yeah, but this is the biggest thing I tell people. Okay, and since it's an entrepreneurial group, let me give you this very thing. This is what stops the CEO in their tracks completely. Okay. Remember, I'm older than most of these people. So I say, hey, I believe in in-person interaction. I think it's important. But I don't know why it has to be done in the office all the time. And if it has to be done in the office, why you have to one size fits all, and why aren't you programming stuff in the office? Okay, fine. That's cool. But I said, let me ask you this. And this is to any CEO. And this, I haven't had a chance to talk to Jamie Dimon or anybody, but if I frame it like this, I don't think Jamie Dimon will. And Jamie is actually giving you a much more subtler answer than the press is picking up. Okay, but to a great extent. His answer really is, I'm against remote work when it does not work. Okay, that's his real thing. Okay, and it doesn't work for certain people. Certain things makes sense.
Certain roles.
Okay,
sure.
Now, right. So what basically happens is I simply say is you are launching a company. It's March of 2025, okay, which is tomorrow, March 2025. You know everything that you currently know about where people work, who your competitors are, AI, cloud-based services, gig work, all of that stuff. Okay. Would you create and run your company the way you currently are? No, I won't. Okay.
Yep.
So then why are you doing it? Because here's the key. People who are coming to compete with you are starting with a fresh sheet of paper.
Yep.
They don't have this goddamn building. They don't have all this other stuff. And they all of a sudden now they can be faster with a lower cost structure, right? Find talent wherever and whenever they want. And they will leave you in the dust while you're worrying about 3 days in the work and 4 days in the work and 5 days in the work.
So this is literally my pet peeve. So I agree with you completely. Like first principle thinking, it makes complete sense. I want to hire fantastic talent anywhere it exists in the entire globe. Added bonus that I can essentially get much lower costs because they live elsewhere and cost of living differences are really significant. In technology has enabled us to work together globally. You have to rethink how you build your organization. So to me, it makes complete sense. Yet I find all these startups and businesses that say I need to be in person. Now, I will say with a caveat, I think small businesses early on, when you're a really early startup, being in person is helpful because it's such a creative, difficult endeavor. So really early on, it makes sense. But immediately thereafter, go global. Get rid of that office. Change your culture to handle that team. But yet, once again, all these companies are not doing that. So why isn't Amazon doing that? Is it because they just, as you said, it's a stealth layoff? I mean, what, and then they're going to go back. They're going to get religion on remote in 2 or 3 years once they've sort of completed their stealth layoff. Like, is it because they have smart people who work at Amazon? So what are they just scared and they want to make a simplistic decision, or is it more than that?
So I believe, again, this is a very smart company. So I'm just going to say that there are, I think, a few things. The first one is many of them have learned to manage the zone of control and they don't know how to manage the zone of influence.
So the leaders haven't changed their mindset of how to actually.
They haven't changed their mindset. So their whole stuff is that's why I say the future does not fit in the containers or mindsets of the past.
Yep.
And they're trying to fit people into the containers of the past. And my basic belief is all the people who work for you, their minds are like champagne corks. They've come out of the bottle and they've swelled and they don't fit back in again. And you should also think about it that way. So one is, in most cases, when there's a resistance to change, there'll be 55 reasons given, but the most important reason is I don't want to change. Okay. So that's sort of number one. And the whole idea is I don't want to change. I'll probably be retired by then. Why do I have to do all this again? It's all of work, whatever. So that's one. Second is, in many cases, they're very scared that they will lose a competitive advantage because many of these companies don't run cultures, they run cults. And a cult requires a compound like Jonestown, right? Yeah. So what happens is if you don't have a compound, then the people start thinking for themselves and doing all kinds of things for themselves. And then all of a sudden you say, what the hell happened? And in today's world where there are going to be more and more billion-dollar companies with less than 100 employees, that becomes a big problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So my whole basic belief is it's a combination of a lack of confidence in themselves, a lack of confidence in the current model, because their current model is basically not a culture, it's a cult, right? When people leave Jonestown, they won't drink the Kool-Aid, then what happens?
And so will that essentially imply that these companies will over time essentially start to fail as new competitors rise who are taking advantage of this?
Absolutely. I think a lot of these large companies are setting up because whenever you have seismic changes in technology, the last time we had a seismic change in technology was the internet. Okay. Then we had what I basically call variations on the internet, of which probably the biggest one was mobile, right? But it was basically a different way that basically untethered you. You were still on the internet, but you were now untethered.
Yep.
But it was basically the internet. Okay. Since then, it's only now when the combination of AI and blockchain and XR and all that working together has brought what I call a new connected age of technology. Whenever there is a shift in connected ages of technology, almost all the incumbents lose.
Yep.
Okay. And what you're basically seeing is the roar of the incumbents. Okay. So it's part of it is like, oh my God, can I slow down this business model? Because the reality of it is, I'll give you this. A year ago, I wrote and people said, what the hell are you talking about? So I said, AI is going to be a commodity. It's going to be like electricity. It's not going to be a differentiator. Okay. And I said, anybody who basically is writing an AI strategy should burn it. They should actually basically think about how does my strategy get affected by AI, not how do I write an AI strategy. That's number one. Okay. I said, most organizations are trying to figure out how to use AI to make their existing models more efficient or effective. That's a good thing to do. But the real threat is going to come from existential risk, whether their business model is relevant anymore. So I said, just imagine that the New York Times spent all of its time using digital technology to figure out how to make their printing presses work faster and their trucks go faster when they were delivering newspapers. When those are efficient and existing and of the existing model. But the reality of it is the digital world meant you did not need printing presses or trucks. Okay. So the AI world is going to basically change the rules of the game on the incumbents. Then many of their advantages are going to be disadvantages. And they're unable to start with a fresh sheet of paper. And most of those leaders have now become not leaders of the future, but leaders of hoarding their own wealth.
Yep, of course. That happens obviously in almost every generation, and that's always danger. But
and so the whole basic belief is how, and somewhere along they've equated them bank balances with thinking that they're like lords and
seem they're brilliant because they had one good idea 20 years ago.
And so my whole basic belief is like, give me a break, right? Because when they're sitting at home, they probably are like insecure, like crazy. Because my thing always is, the more you bray around like a donkey, the more you're like a donkey. You just claim that you're a rich donkey, but that's what it is.
Right. You're still a donkey though. You're at speed. No matter
by the way, these are world-class people with world-class, but they basically, I think they've forgotten, as I say, inside you is the true entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And you've covered them with layers of, I don't know what. Free the real you is to all these people who run the real companies.
But they can't do it because once again, like they are okay being relevant because they're so wealthy now. They don't care. They're scared of that change.
Yeah. So they want to manage the current business. They want to manage their current business model, right? And many of them recognize how dramatically different this new world is going to basically be. Now, initially, they tried to do regulatory capture by basically let's having a whole bunch of rules and regulations. Yeah. But they're going to try all kinds of stuff. But the thing that I've always basically believed, and this is where I truly think global, my whole stuff is you can do whatever you want and talk to yourself as much as you want. Do not underestimate China and India. They're coming. Right. Okay? And my whole they're coming hungry. They're coming fast. And they're coming hungry. And their whole stuff is get out of our face. And remember, the second and third largest number of billionaires are in China and India, right? The greatest amount of technologists and technology talent is in actually China and India. The great environment for technology talent happens to be the United States, okay? Yeah. But at some particular stage, that may not be true.
Correct. I mean, the future consumer markets won't be China, will be India. The number of middle-class people will be larger than the entire United States. So.
Right. And as the CEO of GitHub said, he expects, from 300 million to 1 billion people to be using GitHub.
Yeah.
And he says almost all my growth is Asia and Africa.
Of course.
So the whole idea basically is, it's almost like, when a regime change happens, everybody goes extreme to the current regime. That's when I know regime change is away. Yeah. And that's what basically is happening.
So changing subject really quick because I want to be cognizant of our time and some of the key things I really want to discuss. Related to that, right? You mentioned sort of this, $1 billion companies that have 100 people. Let's go even further. Let's say $1 billion company with one full-time person. We're basically there, right? You already have some like the Kylie Jenner and a few of these other companies probably are already in that category. What do you see this happening, right? You talk a bunch in your book about sort of fractionalized employees, staff on demand. To me, this also makes a ton of sense. And granted, this is sort of my business and what we do, where it's like, you don't need a full-time person. Hire the expert at the time you need the expert for what you need the expert to do. And then when they stop providing the value that they promised, you can fire them and find the next expert that's going to do really well. To me, that makes a ton of sense. And of course, you can take into account that you can hire these experts anywhere in the world, which means they might be a lot lower cost than in the United States. What does that look like in your mind? Like, how does this sort of fractionalized employment work? How does side hustles work? Staff on demand what does that mean for businesses when they're hiring people to be internal at the company, but also when they are hiring experts to help them produce products?
Sure. So the advice I give, one of the most popular things I've written in my Substack, which is at rishad.substack.com, it's completely free, is a series I wrote called A Company of One. Right? And I basically said, regardless of where you are, including if you're working in a company of 100,000 plus, the mindset you must have is that you are a company of one. And what I mean by you're a company of one doesn't mean I, me, mine. It basically means you hone and architect and craft skills that you're really, really good at.
Yep.
2, you learn how to work very well with other people, because your delivery won't be by yourself usually. Even if you're an author, you'll have to have editors and publishers and a bunch of people.
And your
third,
you mentioned that in the book.
In the book, and AI to help. The third thing you're going to basically need to do is build a reputation. So I say build a reputation. I can talk about build a brand, but now increasingly I'm saying build a reputation, right? So reputation is where people say, Adam is very good at these things, and Adam is also great to work with, right? And so those are some of the things you do with a company of one. Now, when you do that, it sets you up to also recognize that almost all your future jobs will be gigs. And that's actually what is already happening in the entertainment industry. People don't work for the studios, they work on the gig, the TV show, the Broadway play. To a certain extent, that's also true at a Boston Consulting Group or a Bain or McKinsey. You go from gig to gig, right? What the company does and what full-time job gives you is 2 things that are very important, but you've got to find a way to replace them. And there are ways to replace them. Much easier outside the United States, making it a little bit difficult in the United States, but hopefully it'll happen. The 2 things that you have with a full-time job that are important is A, healthcare.
Yeah.
Okay. And B is some form of visibility of income, which is by next month, because your bills are constant and your old stuff is, okay, I'm getting paid every month. I'm getting paid as long as I keep my job.
A real challenge.
Right. So what you basically have is, now many places and companies, people are figuring out ways, a little bit on the slightly expensive side in the US, to offset the healthcare. So because right now the big mistake people have made is healthcare is associated with a company versus you can actually access healthcare. In other parts of the world, that's not as much of an issue. So that's number one. You can fix that. The one about the income, lack of income, basically simply means, yes, it's true. But on the other hand, your current job is you've put all your eggs in one basket and it can go from 100 to 0. So instead, what you do is you have a diversified portfolio of tasks and jobs you do. And your income usually will undulate up and down, but it won't go to 0. And at some stage, it'll be quite a bit. Now, the best analogy I have, and this is an analogy I thought of in the last couple of days, and I haven't built it out completely, but now I'm absolutely convinced that this is what it is. It's not an analogy in my book because I just came up with the idea, but it explains everything from my book. So it's not like I've come up with an idea that it's everything in my book is supported by this analogy, but it's an analogy. When I say the future of work,
So
can be best.
Oh, you're back. Oh, sorry. My mic messed up.
The future of work can be best understood by understanding what happened to music. Okay.
Right from
so in music,
to
so no,
you
yeah. So what happened in music is there were 2 things many years ago that were true about music. One is a song was attached to other songs, and the songs were attached to a physical medium. Okay. If you think about the physical medium as a company, right now, work or tasks are done inside a company.
Yep.
Right? So the first thing that will happen is tasks will be separated from a company. They'll just be tasks that need to be done. The other is those things are now called inside a company. The album is called a job. Okay? But inside a job are 10 singles, 10 tasks. And what will happen is, so the tasks will be disintermediated from the other tasks, and then they will be distangled from the medium. And what was going to happen is there are tasks and jobs to be done, and talent that will access those tasks and jobs, and different business models from a freelancer figuring it out, consortiums of people, or companies figuring out how to do this, compile inside the company tasks and jobs. I'm going to move tasks and jobs. There's no job. This is the skill set that you have, right? And we're going to give you these tasks, and those tasks and these are the 3 skills you have, and these are the tasks we have all over the world, and we put tasks and you together. And at times you will basically be needed 60% of the time. At times you'll be needed 80% of the time. At times you'll be needed 100% of the time. That's why I have this other thing in my thing about the fractionalized employee. And so what basically begins to happen is, by having an employee that has benefits but allows you to basically go 60, 80, 100%, it allows companies to be agile. It allows people to have side hustles and side gigs. And it basically brings the work into the world of how work gets done. Right now, the work is basically full-time jobs or freelance jobs. You have the entire company. Now you need to break that model out and think about it from a music thing and re-aggregate to what will be the future way people actually do work, which will be very much like people listen to music. So people today listen to music via playlists.
Yep. And so how do then you measure or manage these sort of fractionalized teams to make sure, because in this world, it almost implies you can't have as much control, but you still need to measure, right? Just like using that sort of example, like Spotify doesn't control, they suggest lots of things for me to do and lots of things for me to listen to. And they measure everything, but they're not telling me what to go listen to.
No, but basically what basically happens, it'll be like a marketplace. And so what will basically, again, there'll be different models, so a combination of companies in different industries will have different things. So for instance, we've now learned that for Boeing, having most of its tasks outside turned out to be a terrible idea.
Yep.
Right? So I'm not saying there's going to be a one-size-fits model. For certain things like Taiwan Semiconductor, maybe a different model than maybe for the Leo Burnett company, right? But the idea is, if what a company exists for is to make and satisfy customers, you make and satisfy customers by delivering things to them.
Mm-hmm.
How best do you make and deliver those things to them?
Yeah.
And today, then we got some different models. So we say, in order for me to get my job done, I need 60% of my employees to be full-time, and 20% to be freelance, and 20% to be fractionalized.
Yeah.
For the next year. And how do I allocate opportunities and jobs? And I can measure it. At the end of a year, you'll say, okay, these people are doing a good job. These clients were happy. These people were underutilized. These people were oversubscribed.
Mm-hmm.
You can measure those. And my whole basic belief is, if you decide what an objective is, you can measure it.
Yeah.
And you just have to decide what the objective is. But in many cases, we've lost track that the only reason companies exist, and everybody used to work from home till 150 years ago.
Yep.
Okay. So my whole stuff is all this stuff about, oh my God. I said, like, the reality of it is 2019, we were thinking we were going to have a mass industrial age. All of us were working in factories, and we couldn't get electricity at home, and it was electricity at factories. Okay. Now we have better technology at home, better computing power at home, right? Lower cost structures at home. It's the exact opposite. So we're moving people from better technology, better freedom, lower cost, to a model that's the opposite. And when people think about it, their mind explodes. After they read my book and after I talk with them, their mind explodes into like jelly, and then they come back together.
So using your analogy then, like take it one step further, right? If what is today, maybe 5% less than that of music is listened to in physical media today.
Yeah. Yes.
Is that where every company in the future, in the next 20 years, gets to where, sure, there'll be doctors and massage parlors that are in person. Everything else would...
I truly believe, and so the last chapter of my first book, when I wrote it, and it came out now 5 years ago, people said, what's he talking about? The last chapter was what's coming. So it was called AI, right? Blockchain and XR. And they said, what the hell is this guy talking about? Well, now that book sells a lot and people are buying this book, And they say, what's he saying in the last chapter? So I had a last chapter, which says, here's what's going to happen. So in that chapter, I basically say, most companies will have far fewer employees than they have today.
Mhm.
I'm convinced. Okay. I'm not saying how many far fewer, but I say companies will have far fewer employees than they have today. So that sounds ominous. My next point is, however, there'll be much more employment than there is today.
Mm.
I'm not saying there'll be much more employees, but there'll be more employment. So I'll be employed. I might not be an employee of a company, but I'll have more employment.
Yep.
Okay. And that's because there will be many, many, many more companies, but they'll be much smaller, right? Companies of 1, companies of 10, companies of 100, right? There'll be many, many more companies. And therefore, the future model will be primarily there'll be some whales and there'll be a lot of what I basically call plankton.
Mm-hmm.
And then once in a while, there'll be the occasional squid or shark, okay, like middle size. But it'll be whales all over the place, and there'll be planktons, mostly planktons. And I explain a whale might be a YouTuber, a plankton might be a creator.
Yep.
Okay, is one way of looking at it. And that's going to be the ecosystem that we're going to go into. And so to a certain extent, 15 years from now, what will be seen as like, oh my God, we were living in the prehistoric ages, is somebody who has a full-time job, commutes an hour to an office, goes up and puts on headphones and does shit. Okay. My whole stuff is, it's going to look, I think by the end of this decade, it's going to look like, oh my God, that was so weirdly stupid.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what basically happens is the thing that is hardest, and this is the one, remember when we started, how long it took us to make change happen at Publicis, right? The technology arrives first. The economics arrives second. The people arrive last. Okay. And so what basically is happening is what we're really seeing is the yelling and screaming of people. The future is here. This is the way it's going to be. Sooner or later, people are going to have to adapt.
It's the last roar of these companies trying to put it back in the bottle. Although I'm still shocked by the number of startups that are starting from scratch and still saying, I need to hire these people full time, who are not like, I would maybe not take it quite as far as maybe you to some extent, but I'd say like the only people you need full time are people who are part of your core competency that is like super specific.
Yeah, exactly. What basically happens, so what I recognize. So my basic belief is you're going to require basically a core group that's full time. You're going to have the fractionalized who have equity and a whole bunch of other things, and then you're going to have a whole bunch of other plug and play people, right? Who don't have equity, right? And who just get a job done, etc.
Does that mean the skill set that you need to have as a future leader or manager or entrepreneur is being really good at hiring people who fit the need that you have at that moment, measuring if they're getting it done, and then moving on quickly, like essentially like almost this like fast line of hiring, recruiting, leading, and then moving on quickly. Rinse and recycle, rinse and repeat.
Right. So what I basically have is one of the things that I mentioned in my book is that to be a leader in the future world, you're going to basically, as a leader, have to think about a few things. So the first thing you're going to have to basically think about is I am now primarily a zone of influence person versus a zone of control person. I'm trying to influence.
Yep.
Second is I'm no longer playing classical music. I'm playing jazz music.
Yes.
So I'm improvising. The third is I'm combining two things. I'm combining the roots and wings. So what is fundamental to my organization and what's new that I have to add? I'm combining full-time employees or with other kinds of employees.
Yeah.
I'm combining how much of what I do gets done inside my quote unquote organization and how much gets done by an outside ecosystem.
Yeah.
So what tends to basically happen is instead of spending your time monitoring and delegating and measuring and allocating, you're spending time guiding, building, creating, mentoring, right? And those are new skill sets. And which is why when I come back, I begin to realize that this eventually is a question of leadership. And that's why I'm launching an entire leadership program. because what I began to realize is that we have a crisis of leadership. And by the way, our leaders are really good. So I'm an old school leader who learned how to be a new school leader and maybe a stupid leader or whatever it is. But the whole idea basically is at some particular stage, it became very clear to me that I had to change my game.
Yep.
Right. And what I tell people is now I'm 65, I'm on Medicare, I'm changing my game again. Okay. And the whole idea basically is, and I don't even need to, but my whole stuff is I want to be state of the art. I want to stay relevant. And I got to. And my whole stuff is if I can do it, you idiots, you can do it. Okay. 30s and 40s and 50s.
Absolutely.
What are you talking about? And by the way, you have to, because you've got 20, 30, 40 years of career ahead of you.
Yep. And so, yes, they don't have a choice. They have to go make this happen. To round it out, I want to go back to two last questions maybe, but one going back to where we started, actually, you mentioned one of the key things about leaders is their ability to tell a good story. And
yes.
Even your work at Publicis, what enables a good story? And I assume that's actually arguably even more important in the world where you are having all these fractional workers and different teammates from different places who maybe don't have the same cultural, because they're not in office, they don't have the same cultural resources that you might otherwise have. So you need to be able to get across your story faster, better, easier. How does that work? What are skill sets people should have? What are some of the great ones? What do they do really well?
So, the one way of basically learning how to tell stories is to be exposed to great stories.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
what does that read? You read Shakespeare? I mean, what does that mean?
So you read anything that you think is good storytelling. It can be Harry Potter, it can be Shakespeare, it can be Moby Dick, it can be Ernest Hemingway, but it doesn't necessarily even have to be read. You could listen to it, you could watch it, you could do all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah.
You can today, one of the television shows I recommend to people is called Landman. It's on Paramount. It's a Taylor Sheridan show about Texas and, sort of oil rights and fracking. But it's an incredibly well-told story, and you begin to realize, okay, these are what good storytelling is. So one is you eventually become a storyteller that fits your personality. You can't tell it outside of your personality, but you expose yourself to different stories. But what is common among stories tend to be the following. Great storytellers find a way to identify underlying human truths. So when you read one of those stories, you basically think that if you had better skills, you would have written it yourself. Right? So you recognize yourself or you recognize the situation and you say, this is my story. It's not Rishad's story. Rishad's written the story. But when I read this, I see myself, I see my kid, I see something else. So one is you ricochet with real human underlying truths, which is the first thing in storytelling. So it becomes personalized to me, if that makes sense. The second is it leaves me at the end of it with a clarity, energy, and belief. So it's basically, this story tells me I now know what I have to do. I feel energized and inspired by this story. And I believe in myself to go do this. Because in effect, when you're having people to change, you're saying, here's what you need to do. You've got the energy to do it. And you have the self-belief to do it. And we believe you can do it. So you can basically do it. So there's that clarity, energy, and belief, which is very, very important in storytelling. And then the last thing is many storytellers that I particularly use metaphors and analogies. So what people can basically do is they can move outside of themselves and connect to something else. So I often basically would use, when I was doing digital in the early days when digital was small, I said, the reason you want digital with your analog is I'm like the Tabasco bottle that spices up the pizza. Your analog is the pizza and I'm the Tabasco bottle. Yes, it's small, but it spices up the entire thing. So you should consider this to be a critical part of your future, which is number one. What I just created now with this whole thing, which I'm going to write about and probably flush out in the next 2, 3, 4 days, is, hey, could it be that the future of jobs is like music, right? And you take these things away and then people say, oh, now I get it. Like a job is really a series of songs, they're tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Why should they be attached to a company and why should they be attached to each other?
Yeah.
Right. And then I said, okay, that's where it is. How would you change? Right? What would you do? How would companies change? If that makes sense. And that means you basically give somebody a operating system that they are familiar with, and then they can play their own story on it.
I love that. Yeah. So sort of becoming their own music player, their own jazz musician. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Which is one of the key things that makes sense.
It makes a ton of sense. A great example of things. To conclude every episode we do at Entrepreneurial Excellence, I like to ask one key question, which is, if there's a single piece of advice that you could give to entrepreneurs of the future, currently today and of the future tomorrow, break it down into one piece of advice. What is that one single thing you would recommend people do to achieve excellence?
I would basically, if I was forced to do one, I would give you this following one. But I actually put it together in 3 things that are connected, but I'll tell you what they are. If I'm limited to one, take time from anything but your family and sleep, and take an hour every day to learn something new. Okay?
Completely.
That's my first one. But my second and third are connected, but then slightly separate. So the second one is, once in a while, build a case for the exact opposite of what you think is true. Okay?
Just like as a mind game. So what we get to in this call, an example of that would be, actually everyone should be in office.
So the whole idea is, when I wrote this book, I said, why shouldn't everybody be in the office, and why is everybody so stupid? Okay. And I built that case, and I could only come out by basically saying the only possible good about that is no one will have to be worried about this, and we will have the benefits of in-person interaction for some young people and other people. That's all what I could come up with. But I built the case, right? And so I said, by the way, I do believe in in-person interactions. I'm not anti-in-person interaction. I'm just anything. And the third one is this, which is less important for entrepreneurs because that's what they're doing. But a lot of people I talk to, are managers and leaders. And I said, are you making sure that you're actually building and creating and making and selling? Or what are you doing? So ask yourself, what are you building? And if you're not building anything at work, maybe you tape a podcast, write a Substack, build a piece of furniture. I said, the day you lose your ability to create, your ability to learn, and the ability to question yourself, is you lose. And those are my 3 things. Question yourself, learn, and never forget that you're a creator.
Love all those. It's so true. It's certainly how I try to lead my life. I get joy every day from these sorts of conversations.
Yep.
Rishad, thank you so much for this.
Welcome.
Time is precious, so thank you for spending with me. How can folks find you if they want to get in touch, learn more? I'm sure that's true. I know your books are available on Amazon because I purchased it there, but where can they find you?
Yeah, so the key thing. So with regard to me, I'm basically, you can read my writings pretty much all free completely at rishad.substack.com. I'm obviously on LinkedIn. If you go to my website, it'll tell you all about my books, which is at rishadtobaccowala.com. And if you want to learn a lot about this book, including conversations I'm having like this, so our conversation will also go up on the rethinkingwork.io website. So it's rethinkingwork.io. So everybody who I'm talking to, I have that. And then soon I'll have conversations where I'm talking to different people who are like leaders, like design leaders who are trying to figure out how to reconfigure offices, things like that. So I'll have sort of a YouTube thing where I'm talking to different people about sort of the future. But that's where it is. Hopefully this is helpful, but thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for being with me, Rishad. This was fantastic.
Fantastic. Thank you.